So I want to talk today. We have the commandment for the Feast of Trumpets to remember. It's supposed to be a day of remembrance. And every time it comes up, I think, well, what am I supposed to remember? Because you can comb the scriptures with the finest tooth whale baleen comb you can possibly find from Victorian times, and you won't find anything where he tells us what to remember. He just says it's a day of remembrance. And so, every year when it comes up, I try to think of like, okay, well, what can I remember that would be in the spirit of this holy day? And I got to thinking, like, for the past several months, I've wanted to do a teaching on holy convocations and why they're important, kind of what they are, because, people tend to call it a service or an assembly, things like that, but the text calls it a holy convocation. And so kind of unpack that, and I just didn't really have an opportunity. And then when I saw we were coming up on Feast of Trumpets, it's like, oh, why don't we stop and just kind of remember? Because Leviticus 23, which you're going to read here in a little bit, goes through and talks about all these beautiful holy convocations. And the fourth commandment, we all know, is the one that specifically says, remember this commandment, which is the weekly Sabbath. He doesn't say remember to honor your mother and father. He doesn't say remember not to steal. He says remember to keep the Sabbath. So tying in with that theme, what are we remembering? I want to try to remember the purpose of these holy convocations, these days that Yahweh gave us. So I put together kind of a study, and then we'll have kind of a discussion coming out of that. It's kind of a little two-part thing here. Holy and convocation. We're going to take a look at what both those words mean in just a basic way, and then we're going to tie it together in a way that hopefully puts the spirit into it. So holy. If I say holy, what does holy mean? Most of us that have been in this Hebrew roots, Messianic, Torah space, whatever you want to call us, will say set apart. It means set apart. True, it does. We're going to talk about why that's important. Things are set apart for a reason. And we're going to talk about that reason. But Exodus 3 is where we're going to start reading. There's a couple spots where this word for kadosh and its root word are mentioned. I'm not a Hebrew linguist, but as I understand, one is more like a noun, adjective. One is more like a verb, holy versus make holy. But we're going to start in Exodus 3, and we're going to read verse 1 through 6. This is the first specific mention of Strong's H6944, kadosh. So Exodus 3, we'll read verse 1 through 6. Moses was pasturing the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. He led the flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of Elohim. The angel of Yahweh appeared to him in a blazing fire from the midst of a bush, and he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, yet the bush was not consumed. So Moses said, I must turn aside now and see this marvelous sight, why the bush is not burned up. When Yahweh saw that he turned aside to look, Elohim called to him from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. Hineni. Verse 5, then he said, do not come near here. Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. He said also, I am the Elohim of your father, the Elohim of Abraham, the Elohim of Isaac, and the Elohim of Jacob. Then Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at Elohim. So this is the first mention of this word for holy in this context. I figured it would have gone back to Genesis or something, but here we are in Exodus. And so I'm going to pose a question here that we might have all thought of sometime before. The place where Moses had to take his sandals off was holy. Was the place itself holy, or was it holy because Yahweh's presence was there? And we get into this, when we start talking about the Holy Land. How do we define the Holy Land? Is the land itself the very dirt holy? I would say in some way, yes. But what really makes it holy is when the presence of Yahweh is there. So anywhere Yahweh was, he could have been in my backyard meeting with Moses, and Moses would have had to take his sandals off. So that's kind of our first clue when we think about what holy means. The King James, they translate it in several different ways. The word holy, obviously, 262 times. Sanctuary. If we think in modern terms of like a church, the sanctuary is kind of off limits. You don't just run around the sanctuary. A lot of churches don't let you even bring food and drink into the sanctuary because they're afraid you might spill it and make a mess. So we have this idea in modern times of there's this set apart, cordoned off space that you don't have common traffic to. They translate it as hallowed or made holy, most holy, and this is in the terms of like the holy of holies, the most holy place, dedicated. So like if I have a dedicated car and I say, this is the car that I only go to Scott's house in, the moment I go to David's house, I violated the holiness of that car because I dedicated it, I set it apart for a specific purpose, and I violated that specific purpose. So it's kind of another way to think about it. And I would use the same car to go to both of your places because I don't have that kind of money. So, and consecrated. When you consecrate a priest, you're setting him apart. You're making him holy. So let's go over to Genesis 2. Now this is Strong's H6942. They are related words. Genesis 2, we'll read verse 3. We're going to read about the very, very first Sabbath. And I'd like to reiterate that the very, very first Sabbath keeper wasn't Jewish. He wasn't even Hebrew. So Sabbath as a concept, as an idea, transcends our race. It transcends our culture. It goes right back to the very creation. So this is after he created everything. I'll just start in verse 1. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed and all their hosts. By the seventh day Elohim created his work which he had done. He rested or ceased, stopped on the seventh day from all his work which he had done, because I doubt if he was exhausted. Then Elohim blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, my English says, that's that word there, because in it he rested from all his work which Elohim had created and made. So Yahweh took this seventh day of creation and he set it apart. He sanctified it. He made it holy. And that sets the pattern for going forward in time. Every single time we come up on this seventh day, the weekly Sabbath, it is holy. It is set apart in time. Abraham Heschel liked to call it a place in time. And I like the way that sounds. It gives me like, we can go to a place and we can have finite boundaries and we can see, okay, the floor goes to here and there's a door there, and but time is a little bit more flux. It's a little bit more fluid. So it's nice to have a sense of time as being actually separated. That word, Strong 6942, the King James translates it as sanctify, which we just read there, hallow. These are all related. Dedicate, holy, prepare, consecrate, appointed. And it even has purified. So this idea of being holy or being made holy also has an idea of purification. And if you think about it, if my daughter has a beautiful dress, I'm not going to let her go out and play in the dirt in her beautiful dress. Why? Because I'm setting apart that beautiful dress. I'm trying to protect it. This is a theme we'll come to later. I've come to see over the years that holiness has everything to do with protection. You're quarantining something very important and very special to protect it from other things that could contaminate it. So these are things I want us to think about, like when we think about a holy convocation. And I want to think about society on a broad scale. I want to think down to our community like we have here, and right on down to the family scale. When we get together to have holy convocations, is the actual implementation of holiness in alignment with what we read in the text? And everybody will have a different perspective on that. And I think it's a good conversation. I'm hoping we'll have one later. But we need to kind of figure out, okay, like, are we really, really doing what it takes to be holy, especially on these holy days of Yahweh? So now we're going to look at the word convocation. We're going to go to Leviticus 23. I said we'd read the whole chapter. And normally on a holy day like this, we would just read the relevant verse that deals with that holy day. But because there's so many convocations that are holy in here, I want to read the whole chapter. And it's a good refresher. Yahweh spoke again to Moses, saying, speak to the sons of Israel, and I would say daughters. That's how Hebrew works. Say to them, Yahweh's appointed times, which you shall proclaim as holy convocations, my appointed times are these. Kind of like that first Sabbath. Are these the appointed times of the Jews? Are these the appointed times of the Hebrews? Yahweh says they're his, so they transcend us. But it's also interesting here, and this has to do with the nature of convocation. He says, you shall proclaim. When you proclaim something, you have to verbalize it in some way. You're almost like shouting. You're making a proclamation, almost like a herald. And when you think about their culture back then, the way that they didn't have telephones, they didn't have internet, they didn't have these things, you did have to have people go out and loudly say, hey guys, it's time to get together. I kind of wouldn't mind a return to that. That would be kind of refreshing. For 6 days, work may be done, but on the seventh day, there is a Sabbath of complete rest, a holy convocation. You shall not do any work. It is a Sabbath to Yahweh in all your dwellings. We were with a family years and years and years ago. I'll keep this as vague as I can. And we were there for the weekly Sabbath. And we were like, okay, or are we going to have the Holy Convocation? And they were like, wait a minute, Holy Convocation, we don't have to have a Holy Convocation on the weekly Sabbath. And we pointed them here, and like, it says to have one for the weekly Sabbath. And they're like, oh. And these are people that have been doing Torah for like decades. And for whatever reason, and I'll have a confession to make in this regard as I get up to Day of Atonement here in a minute myself. But for whatever reason, they read this and read this and read this, and it just didn't click. Oh, we're supposed to have a Holy Convocation today. And how many Sabbaths had they kept without intentionally having a meeting? So it is important. These are the appointed times of Yahweh, holy convocations, which you shall proclaim at the times appointed for them. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month at twilight, is Yahweh's Passover. Then on the 15th day of the same month, there is the Feast of Unleavened Bread to Yahweh. For 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall have a holy convocation. You shall not do any laborious work. But for 7 days you shall present an offering by fire to Yahweh. On the seventh day is a holy convocation. So there's 2 during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. You shall not do any laborious work. Then Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, when you enter the land which I'm going to give you to reap its harvest, then you shall bring in the sheaf of the firstfruits of the harvest to the priest. He shall wave the sheaf before Yahweh for you to be accepted. On the day after the Sabbath, the priest shall wave it. On the day when you wave the sheaf, you shall offer a male lamb 1 year old without defect for a burnt offering to Yahweh. Its grain offering shall be 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil, an offering by fire to Yahweh for a soothing aroma, with its drink offering 1/4 of a hin of wine. Until that same day, until you've brought in the offering of your Elohim, you shall eat neither bread, nor roasted grain, nor new growth. It is to be a perpetual statute throughout your generations in all your dwelling places. You shall also count for yourselves from the day after the Sabbath, from the day when you brought in the sheaf of the wave offering, there shall be 7 complete Sabbaths. You shall count 50 days to the day after the 7th Sabbath. Then you shall present a new grain offering to Yahweh. You shall bring in from your dwelling places 2 loaves of bread for a wave offering made of 2/10 of an ephah. They shall be of fine flour baked with leaven as firstfruits to Yahweh. Along with the bread, you shall present 7 one-year-old male lambs without defect, and a bull of the herd, and 2 rams. They are to be a burnt offering to Yahweh with their grain offering and their drink offerings, an offering by fire of a soothing aroma to Yahweh. You shall also offer 1 male goat for a sin offering, and 2 male lambs 1 year old for a sacrifice of peace offerings. The priest shall then wave them with the bread of the firstfruits for a wave offering with 2 lambs before Yahweh. They are to be holy to Yahweh for the priest. So this is meat that's being offered, and only the priest can eat it. It's holy. It's set apart to him. I can't go up and eat it. And we see, we're not going to read it, but with David and the showbread, it was kind of a big thing because the showbread was holy. Only the priests were to eat the showbread. And in that case, Yahweh chose to honor his greatest principle, his greatest value, which is life, to actually let David and his men eat from that sanctified bread. And in some cases, Yahweh does value life overall over his sanctification of these things that he set apart. But generally speaking, these are lines that he's put in place that he expects us not to cross. And of course, in that case, they actually worked with the priest. They got confirmation and everything was okay. They didn't just do it in a high-handed, rebellious kind of way there. Verse 21, on this same day you shall make a proclamation as well. You are to have a holy convocation. You shall do no laborious work. It is to be a perpetual statute in all your dwelling places throughout your generations. When you reap the harvest of your land, moreover, you shall not reap to the very corners of your field, nor gather the gleaning of your harvest. You are to leave them for the needy and to the stranger. I am Yahweh. Now, he doesn't say it, but the corners are off limits. There's a kind of holiness here. If I have a farm field, I can't go out and harvest the corners. They're for someone else. They're dedicated to the poor. So we have this holiness principle all through the word, even if he doesn't spell it out in black and white for us. Verse 23. Again, Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the sons of Israel, saying, in the 7th month, on the 1st of the month, you shall have a rest, a reminder of trumpets, a holy convocation. That's today, isn't it? You shall do no laborious work, and you shall present an offering by fire to Yahweh. Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, on exactly the 10th day of the 7th month is the day of atonement. It shall be a holy convocation for you. You shall humble your souls and present an offering by fire to Yahweh. You shall not do any work on this same day, for it is a day of atonement, to make atonement for you on behalf of Yahweh your Elohim. If there is any person who will not humble himself on this same day, he shall be cut off from his people. As for any person who does any work on that same day, that person I will destroy from among his people. You shall do no work at all. It is to be a perpetual statute throughout your generations in all your dwelling places. It is to be a Sabbath of complete rest to you. You shall humble your souls. On the 9th of the month at evening, from evening until evening, you shall keep your Sabbath. Again, Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the sons of Israel, saying, on the 15th of this 7th month is the Feast of Booths, or Tabernacles, for 7 days to Yahweh. Is everybody ready for Tabernacles? We've been getting our tents, getting our campers, getting everything ready, getting all the gear ready, getting our hearts ready. You're definitely ready. Me too, sister. Fist bump from across the room. All right, I'm ready. I love this time of year. And it looks like here locally, the trees are getting ready to pop and do their kind of fall thing right on cue. So it has the possibility just to be a magnificent week. I'm super excited. Okay, so verse 35. On the first day is a holy convocation. You shall do no laborious work of any kind. For 7 days you shall present an offering by fire to Yahweh. On the 8th day you shall have a holy convocation and present an offering by fire to Yahweh. It is an assembly. You shall do no laborious work. We're going to talk about that idea of assembly here later. These are the appointed times of Yahweh, which you will proclaim as holy convocations, to present offerings by fire to Yahweh, burnt offerings and grain offerings, sacrifices and drink offerings, each day's matter on its own day. Besides those of the Sabbaths of Yahweh, besides your gifts, and besides all your votive and free will offerings, which you give to Yahweh. On exactly the 15th of the 7th month, when you have gathered in the crops of the land, you shall celebrate the feast of Yahweh for 7 days, with a rest on the first day and a rest on the 8th day. On the first day you shall take for yourselves the foliage of beautiful trees, palm branches and boughs of leafy trees and willows of the brook. You shall rejoice before Yahweh your Elohim for 7 days. You shall thus celebrate it as a feast to Yahweh for 7 days in the year. It shall be a perpetual statute throughout your generations. You shall celebrate it in the 7th month. You shall live in booths or tents or tabernacles, temporary dwellings for 7 days. All the native born in Israel shall live in booths, so that your generations may know that I had the sons of Israel live in booths when I brought them out from the land of Egypt. I am Yahweh your Elohim. So Moses declared to the sons of Israel the appointed times of Yahweh. So we've got a whole bunch of holy convocations in here. And on some of these events, like the week-long things, some of the days in the middle are not days that are holy. But they kind of are on some level, because you can only keep tabernacles in the 7th month. We don't do it in the 5th month. We don't do it in January. So there is a constraint on when we do it. So there are limits. And limits always, in my mind these days, imply some measure of holiness. Limits are there for a reason. So this word for convocation is Strong's H4744 Mikra. King James usually gets it right. Convocation, assemblies, calling, and reading. And that reading is interesting. Well, let's take a look at that. Let's go over to Mark. We're going to connect this to the word synagogue here in a second. Let's go over to Mark chapter 1. If I can ever get there. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So Mark chapter 1, we're going to read verses 21 through 28. Mark 1, 21 through 28. Where'd it go? There it is. Okay, so Yahshua was going through Galilee. They went into Capernaum, and immediately on the Sabbath, he entered the synagogue and began to teach. They were amazed at his teaching, for he was teaching them as one having authority, and not as the scribes. Just then there was a man in their synagogue with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, saying, "What business do we have with each other, Yahshua of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of Elohim." Yahshua rebuked him, saying, "Be quiet and come out of him." Throwing him into convulsions, the unclean spirit cried out with a loud voice and came out of him. They were all amazed, so that they debated among themselves, saying, "What is this? A new teaching with authority. He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." Immediately, the news about him spread everywhere into all the surrounding district of Galilee. So we talked about the idea of holiness and convocation. Um, Convocation, we'll get into the English here in a second, but that Hebrew for makra, the idea of like a gathering, the idea of an assembly, and it's holy. So it needs to be holy in time, it needs to be holy in place, and it needs to be an actual group that's called together. And here in a little bit, I'll talk about some of the I guess, exceptions because life happens. People get sick. We have families. We have small children. Sometimes the nearest gathering is a little drive away. There's these things to consider as we work this out. But generally speaking, he wants Israel to have holy convocations on these special days. Now, the synagogue here, this is Strong's G4864 synagogue. King James, again, they get it right. Synagogue, congregation, assembly. A synagogue is just a meeting place. We could technically call this here today a synagogue, even though it's not a brick building. It doesn't have, Beit Hashem, whatever, it doesn't have the usual trappings of a synagogue. But for whatever reason, in English land, in the West, we decided to call, when the Jews get together and have a holy convocation, we'll call it a synagogue. When the Christians get together and have a holy convocation, we'll call it a church. I haven't done the history on why that split happened, but functionally, they're kind of the same idea. You're getting together in a special place, special time to have an assembly. So with Joshua here, and he was casting demons out all the time, but this is interesting to me because it says that this demonic was in the synagogue. So to me, this is Joshua saying, no, not in here. This is a holy place on some level. Is it as holy as the temple? No, but there is holiness there. So he, I think, is, I guess he could have waited or whatever reason he chose. But when I read this, I thought, oh, he's enforcing the holiness here. He's saying, we're not going to do this thing here. So get out. Get behind me. So in our English here, convocation, con means together. It can also mean share. Vocation it comes from the root word for speak. So like vocal, I vocalize. If somebody asks you what your vocation is, you speak and tell them what your job is. I don't know why they decided on vocation and profession for your jobs. You're professing what you do for a living. But either way, that's our English. So a convocation in English has the same meaning as mikra in Hebrew. It's an idea of calling together. You're actually announcing, hey, we're having a group meeting here. And in the Hebrew and even in the English, it has an idea of reading. We're going to read in Nehemiah here later about the Torah being read. And of course, I think there's also room for group reading, group study, but the word needs to be the focus. Everything we do in regards to Yahweh and his ways has to have some purpose that we're driving towards. In my opinion, if we're getting together for fellowship, fellowship is great, but in order to call that fellowship a holy convocation, that fellowship needs to be going somewhere holy, and it needs to be holy as defined by Yahweh. If we're not taking our fellowship and moving it into his holiness, it's a fellowship, it's a gathering. It might be great, it might be beneficial, but we can't really accurately call it a holy convocation. And so these are things that I've been thinking about over the past several months and things that I've been looking at in my own life on how I can kind of tighten things up and maybe make things a little more, I guess just more impactful, to where I'm not just going through the motions, because it's really easy for us to fall into these traps where we just start going through rote tradition. We just start doing the same thing over and over and over again. He wants us to do the same thing over and over and over again. That's why we do this every year. But we have to be careful that we don't let it fall into rote tradition. It's really easy. I want to talk about where I think this is going, and I'm going to say a word that I hope is provocative. I'm hoping it makes a little cringe go through the room. I'm going to say the word religion. I see on Facebook all the time, and I've been guilty of this before, this idea of religion bad, religion bad, religion bad. We've escaped from religion. We don't do religion anymore. We do the truth. Well, then why over in James 1 is James talking about true religion is this, taking care of the orphans, the widows, the poor, these kinds of things. There is a true religion. And I think that holy convocations, if they're done properly and with the right spirit, can actually make religion a good thing. So religion, the word religion in our Bibles tacks back to a couple of Greek words, but I like it in English, the etymology of religion in English. It goes back to, there's a couple possible origins. Religere, which means to go through again in terms of reading or in thought. So religere means to read something again or to think through something again. That should be something we're doing on our holy convocations. It should be something we do with our faith in general. And what is the purpose of reading through things over and over and over again? We want to acquaint ourselves with the material. We want to bring it deeper into us. We want to actually become one with it at some point. Same with our thoughts. And ideally, if we're reading Yahweh's word over and over and over again, that's going to train our thoughts to where our thoughts are thinking these things over and over and over again. Another possible origin is, and this is the most agreed upon, is that it has to do with binding. Like when we just read about the wave sheaf offering, you take the stalks of grain and you bind them together. It's this binding. And that's the word religare. So there's religare and religere. Religere is the reading, religare is the binding. I like this in English. I like where this takes us, because when we get together on a holy convocation, we're doing these cycles of righteousness that David talked about in the Psalms over and over and over again. But he wants us to do it in a group. He wants us to do it together. They've actually found in cognitive studies, there's this totally new field of psychology that they're calling distributed consciousness or distributed cognition. They're finding that when you put people in a group and have them do puzzles and things, you can give me a puzzle and say, here, James, solve this puzzle. But you could put me in a group. I will do that puzzle better in a group than I will on my own, even if the group itself is not directly telling me how to do the puzzle or give me input. Just being around other people, they're showing clinically, is actually making us more intelligent and able to do things. They're starting to find, and these are not in our camp. These are people out in the world that don't have these same paradigms that we do. They're starting to see, I mentioned atheists earlier. Atheists are starting to go to church. They have atheist church on Sundays. It's a big thing in the UK right now because they're missing the binding. They're missing. They got off on their own island and they were doing their own thing. There is no God. I'm just, and it's like their lives are empty. They don't feel fulfilled. Atheists have a higher rate of suicide than the rest of the population. They don't have purpose in their life. They're starting to see when they encounter believers, generally we're a happy bunch. We have issues. Life happens. But generally speaking, they look at us and they're like, I kind of want what you have. I just don't want the whole God thing. So they're trying to have what we have without Yahweh. And they're getting somewhere. They're finding some sense of purpose. Their lives are improving. That's just with the bond human to human. Imagine if they made that vertical and actually bonded with their Creator. So I like the idea of a holy convocation as a means to get together in a holy way, in a holy place, and actually be bound and knitted together tightly. If you think about the ancient Hebrews there in Israel, they were spread out. I mean, we're spread out, but we have cars. They had cars, donkeys. They didn't even really have horses. That was for the wealthy. So they're walking or they're riding a donkey. So if you think about a Sabbath, a weekly Sabbath, you're with your family every day, but the weekly Sabbath, you're going to travel a little bit and you're going to get together with your locals once a week. And if you do that 52 weeks a year, you're going to have a much better ease of binding. It's going to be easier for you to connect with that group of locals around you than if you just said, well, I'm just going to study the Bible by myself and the Holy Spirit will teach me. I did that for years. And looking back, it was dumb. I'll just say it. I hated it. My family did that. We didn't go anywhere for years. We thought, well, anybody can read the Bible and pull the truth out. But what I found is that when you do that, this is how we have confirmation bias. This is how we get echo chambers built. And a holy convocation, the bigger the group, if it's targeted upwards towards Yahweh and His holiness, will help us avoid those traps, I think, because people can push back. I always say questions, comments, and strong opinions. I mean it. Because if I'm just up here just saying what I believe and nobody challenges or questions anything, well, of course I'm right. Everything I just said is 100% accurate. Go me. but it might not be because I'm a human. And so this is where I think getting together is so huge. And then, of course, you have the yearly festivals where we get together 3 times a year. All the males are to come. Then you get together with the wider bunch that you don't see so often because you're spread out. That gives you a chance to bind with them, to bond with them. And I think that, like, the whole religion thing, we could reclaim it and make it a good word again if we were to actually really put the holiness back in these convocations and really put the assembly back in the convocations. It takes work if you've got small kids to travel and go someplace. But if you can make it work, I believe it's worth it, you know? And if the community gets together and the community grows and strengthens, if we have a family that's struggling to make it because of gas money, guess what? We can all help provide the gas money. There's ways to make this happen, but we don't know unless we get together. So anyway, so I want to talk just a little bit. I mentioned the idea of protection earlier, how I feel like Sabbath or holiness has to do with protection. And we're going to close out here in a little bit in Nehemiah. But I want to just to kind of talk about this a little bit, like a holy convocation. When you step into a holy convocation, there needs to be something about it that tells you that it's holy, that it's different, you know? And so that can be the environment, that can be the decor. Maybe you've got, doors closed. If you're like in a busy street or whatever, you're doing things you can to isolate from the sound. But I think it also has to do with behavior. Like if you think about Aaron, the high priest, going into the Holy of Holies, or even just the regular priest going to the holy place, they don't get to just go up in there and just do whatever. They have to elevate their conduct. They have to elevate the way they're behaving to go into that space. They have to align themselves more with Yahweh's character to go into that space. And what if we thought about when we get together here or wherever we meet, what if we thought about why don't we elevate ourselves the best we can? I'm not saying let's all come in 3-piece suits and ball gowns, but step it up a notch. Like my wife and I talk about all the time. It's like we don't have any problem sitting and watching a movie for 2 hours. We can sit at home and watch a movie for 2 hours and not get up to go to the bathroom. We're good. But for whatever reason, when we have a gathering like this, and I can get long-winded, I know, I'm aware, we should be able to sit in space for an hour, 2 hours max, and allow ourselves to be bound and knitted together to the words that are coming out of this book, if we actually do believe this book is holy. And we can trust that the speaker, whoever's reading or presenting the word, is conveying a sense of holiness through this word. Hopefully we are. The people I know that teach, I trust them. So I think we're good there. But if we could find some way to just really challenge ourselves on an individual and on a family level to just really submit to the holiness of the gathering. If you have a holy convocation and the boundaries of the convocation are fuzzy, there's a fuzzy porous edge around it where people are coming and going, that can be distracting. If you're Aaron and you're doing your work in the temple, the last thing you want as you're dedicated to your goal is to have distractions. So I'm not saying like let's just go full Catholic and just have this, top down, I'm not advocating for that. But I do think that we all have things we can do to kick it up a notch. And I think that Abba deserves it. I think that as we're coming up into these last days, presumably, we need to do a better job of setting an example to the world out there. There are people right now, the Catholic Church is growing. Their numbers are growing. I didn't know this until recently, but the Eastern Orthodox Church, the Russian Orthodox, the Greek Orthodox, all the different Orthodox, the Eastern Church, I think it was back in 2023 or 2022, they had I think 600,000 people worldwide. By 2024, that had skyrocketed to 7 million. And when you talk to these people, I've researched this, they tell you, I was a Protestant. Most of them are Protestants. And the Protestants, typically, not every church, but you see this trend. They're bringing Starbucks into their churches. They're showing up to do a sermon in tattered jeans and sneakers. Like trying to look like the world outside because they want to draw people into the church. And more people are like, the world outside is bad. The world outside is a grease fire, a dumpster fire. I don't want to bring that into the church. I want to get out of that when I go to church. The Catholic Church gives them that. The Orthodox Church gives them that. They're not trying to bring Starbucks and all, all this hipster stuff in. They're doing the old-fashioned stuff that they've done. They have religion. I would argue that the rituals and the traditions and rites that they're doing are the wrong ones generally. I would argue that if they did the things in this book, and if they were motivated by the same things, then they'd be on the right track. But because they replaced Yahweh's holy convocations with their holy convocations, they've replaced his idea of holiness with theirs. They have a form of godliness, but it's empty. It's missing the substance. It looks good, and it's drawing in a lot of people. But we, those of us who read the book and actually try to live the book, I think we have an opportunity with these holy convocations to really make them powerful. I think they are intrinsically powerful. But if we could focus on elevating our holiness, if we could focus on being more true and loyal to the idea of assembly, whether that be like getting together once a month like we do around here, everybody kind of comes in from the greater region, wherever you're at locally. And even if you're you can't go because you're sick, you can still call your family together. I struggle with this. This is one of my biggest failings as a parent is if we stay home on Sabbath because we're sick or whatever, we end up just laying around. And it's 5, 6 o'clock and it's oh, I haven't even gotten the Bible out with the kids yet because you're resting, And it's I'm challenging myself to be more diligent. If we stay home for that reason, I have to call a holy assembly, even within my own little house with my kids and my wife, And, if somebody can't travel for whatever reason, I'm not a huge fan of this, but there are online gatherings and they do have a sense of holiness about them if they're done properly. And there is some type of binding there, but it's not quite the same as if you're in a room with people that you can hug. And so I think this is kind of a challenge for me and for everybody else. Let's find ways to get together more and have these holy convocations more. I mean, we do have them regularly as we can, but really be more diligent in protecting them, pulling them out of space and time and saying, these occasions of Yahweh are valuable enough to make sacrifices for. And we all sacrifice already to come to things like this. But is there more that we can do? And if there are people in the assembly that for whatever reason don't have the means to make it, if they have to travel, like I said, we can jump in and do that. We're commanded to bear each other's burdens. And of course, part of the binding is if I don't know somebody's burden because we're not around each other, how can I help them bear it? You find out other people's burdens when you're around them. It just happens organically. Anyway, so I want to close with Nehemiah. Let's go to Nehemiah. And I mentioned the idea of reading, gathering, these types of things. We're going to go to Nehemiah chapter 9. Where are you, Nehemiah? There you are. And we're going to read verses 1 through 4. Nehemiah chapter 9, verses 1 through 4. And just think about this. Just think about this. Put yourself in these people's shoes. On the 24th day of this month, the sons of Israel assembled, convocation, with fasting and sackcloth and with dirt upon them. The descendants of Israel separated themselves from all the foreigners, there's holiness, and they stood and they confessed their sins and the iniquities of their fathers. While they stood in their place, they read from the book of the law of Yahweh, their Elohim, for a fourth of the day. And for another fourth, they confessed and worshiped Yahweh, their Elohim. So if we just say a day on average, let's just say 12 hours, fourth of that's 3. Imagine standing while someone reads the Torah for 3 hours straight. I can't do 3 hours of just reading. My voice would give out. And he talks about here later how they rotate. The Levites kind of rotate. And then they do another fourth of a day in praise and music. Now, that one's a little bit easier for us, especially if the music's good. At the assembly back in Texas, we would we would do the service and fellowship first, and then we would do the praise and worship at the end. So there were nights when we literally went until like 1 or 2 in the morning, just playing praise music, just until as much as people were willing to raise their hands and praise, we would just go and go and go. I'd play bass until my thumb bled, like we were just going and going. But the idea that he wants one day in 7 that he himself hallowed from creation. And then within that one day in 7, he just wants 3-4 hours maybe for us to just come fully out of the world and fully engage in a convocation that's directed laterally to each other, but unified up to him vertically. It's like, can we do better to give him that time, to give him that space, and to amplify the holiness? I'm going to say yes, every single one of us can do something to elevate this. What that is per person, per family, it's subjective. We all have different circumstances. We all have different resources, different means. But I believe we all can do something. And so I'm calling this Feast of Trumpets for us to remember why he gave us these beautiful holy convocations. He gave us these opportunities to get together. And he did it for a reason. We read from the garden, it's not good for a man to be alone. I don't think he was just talking about find yourself a cute lady and marry her. I think he was talking about in general. We find, like, as a trucker, I'm on the road 5 days a week. I get pretty lonely. It's a bummer. There are people that are isolated in other ways, and we're just finding more and more out in the mainstream how deleterious that is to our health, being alone. Just even having one other person to communicate with, face-to-face especially, makes a big difference. So I'm going to put that as a challenge, for discussion. We'll talk about it later. And, what can we do individually, collectively, corporately to really kind of like head where they were doing here? Like Ezra talks about, he was gathering them in the rain. It's implied that they were standing in the rain listening to Ezra. And, when he was like, you guys married all these foreign wives, and they were talking through all that stuff, and they're like, well, it's the rainy season. Can we table this for now and come back in a little bit when it's not the rainy season, But like, if Ezra was here, I mean, we've got 2 of them, but if the Ezra was here and he wanted to do a holy convocation and read from the Torah, and it was raining, and we had to stand out in the rain, would we be dedicated enough to this holy God we serve to do it? I would have a hard time. But he deserves it. So I'm just going to put that out there kind of as a challenge, not in a negative, pushy way, but like, let's see what we could do to up our game. Game's the wrong word. Up our participation. I don't even know what the right word is. Up our holiness. Let's just say that. Up our holiness. So it's a basic idea, but it's one that I thought it was worth emphasizing. This idea of coming together, and he did these holy convocations for a reason. And he didn't just say, stay in your house and every year read these scriptures. He could have done that. He could have said, read through Deuteronomy in your house every year, every Sabbath, stay home and read. But he says, holy convocation, over and over and over and over again. And to keep it relatively brief, I could have done a whole bunch of examples of holy convocations. We see a bunch of them in the New Testament. Of course, we like to emphasize that Paul was always in the synagogues on Sabbath. Like, why was Paul always in the synagogues on Sabbath if he was a Sunday-keeping Christian? But that's the whole thing. Anyway, so hopefully that was something that we can take and work with. I'll go ahead and open the floor at this point for questions, comments, and strong opinions.